In November 10th of 2008. I woke with horrific back pain, collapsed writhing in pain, and a cold sweat. Soon thereafter, my youngest son came in the room, started rubbing my temple to make me feel better. I felt like he'd driven a white-hot spike through my head. I fell into deep coma. I was rescued by this slowly spinning white light that came towards me as a perfect musical melody. When I saw this slowly spinning pure white light coming out of the darkness, it then opened like a portal, a wormhole up into this rich, ultra-real gateway valley. Dr. Eben Alexander. I'm a former Harvard neurosurgeon. I taught neurosurgery at Harvard Medical School for 15 years and other places too. So very involved in the science of the brain and mind and the nature of consciousness. Was kind of my scientific interest. And I was brought up, like most of us, in the kind of conventional 20th and early 21st century kind of conventional science of materialism or physicalism. The notion that only the physical world exists, and therefore things like thoughts, beliefs, attitudes don't have a concrete footing in reality, are not really the topics of scientific discourse. And that kind of leaves us very much in the dark. And that's why I think what happened to me in my near-death experience was an absolute gift. And I love sharing that gift. Now, with that materialist belief, I'll also point out that I had grown up, my adoptive father, and this is very important, that I was adopted. My birth mother was unwed, 16 years old, and that becomes a very relevant part of the story later. But I was adopted into a wonderful, loving home. My adoptive father was a globally renowned neurosurgeon. And so that's really what led to my unfolding of life early on in a very scientific sense. But important to point out, my father also had a very profound belief in God and the power of prayer. He used it in his work as a healer, as a neurosurgeon. I still have at my bedside the pocket Bible that he had with him. He was a combat surgeon in the Second World War in the Pacific Theater. He was in New Guinea, then the Philippines, and finally up into Japan. And that little pocket Bible, I think, during his 2 years of overseas, kept him connected with that God that he loved and knew so well. Now, I grew up in the 60s and 70s. I liked following his lead because he was very important to me. But I will say, with all my formal training in conventional science, I was doubting some of these spiritual realities that he just knew so well from having lived them. But for me, it was kind of a struggle. And I think struggle is an important part of this soul journey, because if we don't have enough questions and, some doubts here and there, then how can we fully believe whatever realizations we come to? So for me, these periods of doubt in my life were very important because they set the stage for a profound kind of affirmation of belief as things unfolded. In November 10th of 2008, I fell into deep coma. It all started early in the morning, about 4:30, when I woke with horrific back pain. Thought if I could make my way down the hallway into a hot bath, maybe that would help some of the muscle spasm. I almost couldn't get back out of the bathtub. And then I kind of struggled back to the bed, baby steps, collapsed, writhing in pain and a cold sweat. Soon thereafter, my youngest son, Bond, who was 10 years old at the time, came in the room, realized Dad wasn't off at work, and only that, he looked horrible. He started rubbing my temple to make me feel better. I felt like he'd driven a white-hot spike through my head. That's really about the last memory I have, was a severe headache, severe back pain, writhing in agony, my kind of cognition disappearing by the moment because my brain, my neocortex, was being overrun by an extremely aggressive E. coli bacterial meningoencephalitis. It's the worst kind of meningitis you can have. It's a perfect model for human death because this kind of meningitis attacks all the parts of the brain that are most involved in our detailed conscious awareness as human beings. It attacks the whole outer surface of the brain. When I first got into the hospital there, seizing, uh, kind of groaning and moaning, nothing intelligible coming from my mouth. They could tell I was in deep trouble from this. And Dr. Laura Potter was my ER doc, and she did a lumbar puncture, and out came thick white pus under pressure. And she told me many weeks later when she saw that, she knew based on my rapid descent into coma over just a few hours and the fact that I was that ill from it with a very impaired Glasgow coma scale, um, that I was in deep trouble, that I had maybe a 10% chance of survival. During my 7 days in coma, I was amnesic. I had no memories of Eben Alexander's life, no knowledge of humans, this universe. It really was an empty slate. But I remembered it as just something I accepted. Given that I had no knowledge of any other possibilities, I just assumed that that earthworm eye view, the kind of ugly, unresponsive realm, was the way things are. And the good news is that did not last forever. I was rescued by this slowly spinning white light that came towards me as a perfect musical melody. That was an interesting feature, was the kind of overlap of sensation. But to me, when I saw this slowly spinning pure white light coming out of the darkness, it then opened like a portal, a wormhole up into this rich, ultra-real gateway valley. That portal was not just this light spinning, but it was also the beautiful music that I heard. And the music was important. Music, of course, music in that realm is an ideal form of music. It's not limited by four-dimensional space-time and the physiology of our ears and how they normally acquire sound. Ascended through this light portal into this brilliant ultra-real gateway valley. I had no body awareness at all during any part of this. I was just a speck of awareness, but that speck of awareness in the gateway valley was riding on a butterfly wing, and there were millions of other butterflies looping and spiraling in vast formations, colors beyond the rainbow. I mean, incredible beauty. But that's just the beginning of it, because down below there was this verdant, fertile meadow surrounded by an incredible forest, sparkling waterfalls into crystal blue pools, and there were thousands of beings dancing in this meadow, joy and festivity everywhere, no sign of any death or decay at all. That's why these realms are so kind of magical and powerful in their instructive nature, that there were dogs jumping and children playing, incredible joy there. And yet to me, it was very clearly a kind of a spiritual realm of ideals, kind of the true home of our souls. And the best part about all this was I wasn't alone in witnessing this. There was a beautiful young woman beside me on the butterfly wing. She had sparkling blue eyes, high forehead, high broad smile, high cheekbones. Her face was framed by her lovely light brown hair, and she looked at me with a look of pure love, and her message was delivered telepathically. She never had to say a word, but we had this perfect mind meld, and that's how I got to know her so well in a deep kind of emotional sense. And her reassurance to me as I translated it into language many weeks later, writing it all up: you are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You are richly cared for. You can do no wrong. I recognized in this Gateway Valley that the rules of kind of ideal function and existence here were of love, compassion, kindness, mercy, acceptance, taking care of all of our fellow beings, acknowledging that we're all in this together and we're here to care for each other. In that Gateway Valley, that is where we would reunite with souls of departed loved ones. That is where we would go through life reviews. That realm is completely outside of our earth time. That spiritual realm, that's a timeless realm. And so there's no limitation of earth time, no clock ticking in this Gateway Valley. I remember I had ascended up out of that kind of earthworm eye view through this light portal that also involved music. Well, in the Gateway Valley, there was tremendous joy and festivity, all the dancing going on and merriment. And that was all being fueled because up above were swooping orbs of angelic choirs, orbs that seemed to have a pure spiritual essence. And they were emanating chants and anthems, hymns that would just thunder through my awareness and just absolutely revealed to me the majesty of this beautiful, loving, and unifying force, the God force at the core of it all. Now, you often hear in discussion of NDEs that there's a boundary, and you sense a boundary that maybe you cannot pass, or if you do pass it, you're not going back. And I feel like I've glimpsed that boundary in a sense in the next level of my journey. And that's where I remember seeing all of four-dimensional space-time collapsing down, all of this rich spiritual realm with its kind of timeless, eternal, causal revelations, all of that collapsing down. And then I ascended through yet another light portal that was generated by these angelic choirs, and I entered what I call the core. The core was an infinite inky blackness, but it was filled to overflowing with that divine, unconditional love of the God force. In fact, I came to acknowledge and recognize that my very conscious awareness was directly linked to that God force. So in other words, never could I or any other soul be distant from that force. It's always right there with us. But in that core realm, far more complex and instructional vision came during a later passage into the core. And that's what I call the Indra's net vision. And that was one that absolutely showed me this beautiful fabric of interwoven threads. And the interweaving of threads was actually like our breathing and like our incarnation and then between lives. It was a very powerful demonstration of this journey towards ascendance, towards oneness with the divine, but that it can't happen in one physical lifetime. In that core realm, these beautiful visions showing me these profound realities of oneness, of connection, of the binding force of love. And I would then tumble back down to that earthworm eye view. And I went through many cycles of this. So I cycled through these realms multiple times. Every time I entered the core, I was told, we'll teach you many things, you're not here to stay. And there came a point where in trying to conjure up using these musical memories, the various light portals that would take me to these different levels, it would no longer work. I had fallen back down to the earthworm eye view. By remembering the musical notes of the melody in the past, it had conjured up that light portal that then took me into those higher levels. But as they promised me in the core, you're not here to stay. And now I was finding out that I was stuck back in that earthworm eye view. Now, given everything I'd been through, that was not a problem. I knew I could trust in the universe, that I would be taken care of. And in fact, that's what I witnessed next, were thousands of beings going off into the murky distance around me, heads bowed, some holding candles, and they were murmuring this kind of prayer and energy that was coming to me. And the amazing thing was it brought back the same sense of peace and harmony and being in a spiritual home that I'd first felt in ascending into the Gateway Valley and then the core. But now I'm feeling it at this lowest level. Those thousands of beings gave me tremendous reassurance of the power of prayer. That's what I called it when I came back to this world and was writing all this up many weeks later. And it was really the final thing I saw in my journey that was also very important. 6 faces that kind of bubble up out of the muck. They'd say a few words that I couldn't understand because of my amnesia was still very powerful, and then they'd disappear in the muck. Those faces were of loved ones and friends, very close friends, who were in the ICU room the last 24 to 48 hours of coma. So very importantly, they helped me to time that the vast majority of the spiritual journey had to happen between days 1 and 4 or 1 and 5 of the 7-day coma. Of those 6 faces, the last one I saw was of my 10-year-old son, Bond. I remember his face and his pleading with me, Daddy, you're going to be okay. Daddy, you're going to be okay. Now, I didn't understand the words and I didn't know who he was, but I sensed this incredibly rich, loving connection between our souls. It was a very detailed and elaborate coma journey. But I thought this can all continue or cease because I didn't sense a deep connection that I had any responsibilities. But now all that changed. With his pleading with me, there was another soul out there that needed me in some very profound fashion. And that's what drove me back to this world. That's what brought me back so that within hours, I was opening my eyes, I was sitting up in bed. And then all of a sudden, I'm sitting there with this look on my face of pure joy and bliss and looking each and every one in the eye, doctors, nurses, family, friends. You are deeply loved and cherished forever. All is well. And this incredible, don't worry, all is well. I was reassuring everybody. And she said it was such a paradox that that was coming from somebody that they were so worried about right up until that moment. Now, important to point out, I don't really remember that. And in fact, I don't remember much of that waking up process because my brain was still very affected by the meningitis. And in fact, for the next 36 hours after waking up, I was in and out of this crazy, paranoid, delusional, psychotic nightmare. Simple conversation with people around me led me to know that my brain was still very damaged by this meningitis. In fact, it was very frightening for my family to see all that. Here I was waking up, moments of joy. Oh boy, he's coming back. But then they were realizing just how savaged my brain was from the experience. But literally over 36 hours, all of that cleared up. Memories started coming back. In fact, I had a complete return of all memories by about 2 months post coma. And interestingly enough, given complex memories of the distant past and discussions with family and close friends, I came to realize that the memories were more complete after the coma than they had been before the coma. It was like this light shining within me, like I was far more present than I'd ever been. It was way too real to be real. I tried to tell my doctors about the spiritual experience, and they would just pat me on the back and say, well, your brain was soaking in pus. We have no idea how you're even coming back to us, but you can forget about it because the dying brain plays all kinds of tricks. So in the early weeks after coming out of coma, my neurosurgical neuroscience knowledge was still not back yet. So when my doctors told me, the dying brain plays all kinds of tricks, I said, okay. So it was a hallucination, but wow, what an incredible story to live through. So I was writing it all up. I wanted to make sense of all this. And, during that same time, in those weeks post coma, I'm going back to the hospital, going through medical records, talking over with my doctors, going through CT and MRI scans, neurologic exams, Glasgow Coma scales. This didn't make sense. It wasn't lining up. This was not a brain that could have a casual, spiritual journey or dream or hallucination. This brain was knocked out from a severe case of full thickness meningoencephalitis. In fact, for example, my CSF glucose level, and you or me, this glucose in our spinal fluid would be around 80 or so. Somebody with horrible bacterial meningitis, that might drop to 20. In my case, the glucose level in my spinal fluid was 1. None of the consultants up and down the eastern seaboard had ever heard of a case that severe with Glasgow Coma scales of 5, 6, and 7. Anything below 9 is deep coma. I mean, this case was really demanding that, we couldn't just apply our normal thinking and logic to it and explain it because there was way too much going on. And once I figured all that out, and of course the book Proof of Heaven goes a long way towards kind of expanding all that and telling the deeper aspects of the story. But the people who've read that will realize 4 months post-coma, that's when I received a picture in the mail. And that's when I finally identified that beautiful guardian angel on the butterfly wing. And from that moment on, 4 months post-coma, I knew this was a real journey. It seemed way too real to be real because it really happened. It didn't happen in the material realm, but in many ways, nothing happens in the material realm. It's all mental from the get-go. And this is where the scientific world is converging on some much deeper and more profound truths that allow for the mutual coexistence and growth of science and spirituality. Because we are both. We have a scientific mind and we're spiritual beings in a spiritual universe. And I've spent these almost 17 years since my coma working with other scientists and experiencers around the world to make better sense of this whole experience and what these experiences tell us about the nature of reality. I mean, one important point to make is for anyone out there who still thinks that near-death experiences are vague and murky and dreamlike, forget it. This world, the material world, is vague and murky and dreamlike. That world is sharp, clear, detailed, meaningful, powerful, transformational. There's no surprise in my mind that near-death experiences are some of the most important, valued experiences that people ever report. These things are life transformational, often in very positive directions. And that's because that realm we enter is a realm of ideals in many ways. When we're over there, that's why a complete life review can happen in 1/3 of cases. More importantly, in Bruce Grayson's mentions of life review, is the fact that something like 3/4 of people talk about the life review from the perspective of all involved. So in other words, it's like the golden rule is written into the fabric of the universe. Treat others as you would like to be treated. Because these life reviews are a beautiful example of how we're all sharing the dream of the one mind. And the more we can manifest love, compassion, and kindness, as has been taught by many major religions and other non-religious ethical systems for thousands of years, then we are starting to live with the deep truth of NDEs and what they're instructing us about our nature as spiritual beings in a spiritual universe. And I came to recognize in this journey that it doesn't matter if you want to call that force God, Allah, Brahman, Vishnu, Jehovah, Yahweh, Tao, Great Spirit. There are many words humans have applied to it, trying to understand it, trying to in some way kind of own it and claim it. And yet, of course, that force, as NDEers will tell you, is far beyond any individual soul being able to claim at all. Although we can certainly come to identify our connection with that beautiful God force and how it shows us we're all in this together and we're truly here to manifest love, kindness, and compassion.